And thank you.
Okay, great. I'll just do, hi everyone, my name is Feyl, and my essay is Tender Daddy and Tender Love, or I Want a Daddy Who Has a 10-Step Skincare Routine. As I began typing this essay, I know that the term daddy immediately brought hypermasculine muscle men to my imagination. Daddies or zaddy flooded my mind, or did I invite them into my bed with me? Their chiseled bodies, enormous bulges, and tight clothing. And yet I was sitting in bed with a cup of peppermint tea on my nightstand next to a book about disco. Some light jazz is playing. I'm wearing a tank top that goes down to my knees with Whitney Houston's face on it. And I have an under eye mask that I'm hoping will clear up the wretched dark circles that have appeared under my eyes. God, I am so far from this idea of daddy. Do I even want to be a daddy? Daddy, and not to take up the space of some rigmarole etymology because that feels like a dad move, was first recorded in the 16th century. I can imagine as infants that are grappling with something so abstract as language, that having words that end in a gentle Y is easier for us. But as we all know now, daddy has a sexual framework around it. Historians have noted that sex workers in the 16th and 17th centuries began to call clients daddy. Did this boost their egos? Did this create an immediate sense of power play? The first and only time someone called me daddy during sex, I felt my body cringe. Ugh, how am I a daddy? Daddy is for older people, and was so young. Plus, I am always in control and making decisions during the day. Let me have a sense of no control in the sheets. Let me be an anti-daddy in this moment. I was apprehensive beginning this process of thinking about daddy, or as a lowercase d. Being trained as an art historian, studying queer and transgender art practices, and as a queer person, I began to question the cliches I conjured. Of course, I can think of the idea of daddy as a one, familial term of complication. I feel that I have figured out my own father's problem during my own therapy sessions. Two, a sexual term, duh, zaddy. Three, queer family. But this last part stuck with me. Queer family, queer mom, me, queer dad, D, or maybe they are plural. The question that I asked at the beginning of this piece, do I even want to be a daddy, speculates on having a physical child. It relates to the, oh, we've been trying for a while. I have always wanted to be a quote, insert a term of whichever parental role you like. Dear Lord, having a child at this time? But what I realized and am realizing is that this essay as a response to daddy was not me working through the issues that I discuss in therapy about my father. I was not trying to formulate some grand response and historical narrative of daddy. I had actually been sensing and acknowledging the extreme acts of love and care that have centered around this project and my everyday life. The daddy issues that tend to come up, neglect, absence, hurt, and confusion, are all extremely valid. I want to hold space for you, but I, for some reason, have been feeling a counter response to this idea of daddy. I think honing in on the sexual use of daddy, daddy is the leather dominatrix with her hair sleeked back, or that barista near my place with the plethora of ring on their fingers, has been a way of me finding a space of reclamation for daddy. Daddy is that queer family. Daddy is, in the people I surround myself by, the acts of love that we find in each other. As queer folks navigating a world that has been ravaged by, and not limited to, global warming, wars, famine, disease, poverty, cuts to social programs, conservative governments, liberal governments that are just conservatives saying the right words, we're seeming to always find spaces for love, for softness. Of course, acts of radicality, protest, rage are invited. As queers, that has been ingrained in us. We have learned these skills. Fuck, we are such amazing beings. But these acts were not shared by our parents, but by our queer families. Those stories, those actions, those memories, all of them are shared and held close, just as we hold ourselves close to each other. How have I been feeling about the idea of daddy this entire time has been how gorgeous my queer family, lovers, and friends are. How they've embodied the acts of daddy that are depicted on TV or in books. Kindness, love, tenderness, and joy are what they show and what they offer. Daddy has been my partner sitting next to me on the couch as we both have sheet mask on and I or he are recounting our days. We're also doing an extensive skincare routine, so we have time to dish the details. Daddy has been a group of friends getting ready to go out together and making each other feel like the center of the universe. Because as queer people, we are. Daddy has been planning this exhibition and sitting with Jenn and Laurel in the Airbnb, allowing words of love and gossip to fill the space. Daddy is a text exchange with a friend where we say, I love you, and hold space, or even share a meme. Daddy is the joyous laughter that fills my garden as we share a meal in the setting sun. Daddy is dancing beneath disco balls and swirling lights as we move around each other. Daddy is the gentle, I'll text you when I get home as you gather your things after a night at a friend's. Daddy is a sense of queer family. Daddy, this loaded term has come to mean for me acts of extreme love and care, of queer love and queer care, the queer daddy who centers care and kindness. Queer folks, I'm speaking to you here. We find our families. We are our families. We stumble upon folks who change us for the better. They center love and allow extreme joy to guide our dynamics. I love you, daddies. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you,
Thank
Graham.
you. Thank you.
So hot, I put my hair up. All right, coming up next is Simone Fischer. I'm gonna make sure that the camera's on you, right? Awesome. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Some faces I know and don't. I'm really happy you're all here. I'm an interdisciplinary artist who avoids the topic of daddy at all costs. So I was both terrified and also really elated to be called upon to contribute to this project. And it's intense, but it's kind of had me do the work that I've been avoiding in a way that's actually resulted in feeling lighter in a lot of different ways. And so without, getting into it, I'm just gonna let what I wrote speak for everything. So this is called Right of Way by myself. All right. I have your eyes. Searing obsidian orbs shine glossy and black as if freshly plucked from the dirt. Still wet with water, minerals, and salt from the earth, my tears burn hot too. My first instinct was to leave these pages blank. Conceptually speaking, it seems like the most truthful gesture to convey my relationship with my biological father, blank, entirely unknown. But I take responsibility to the reader seriously to probe my own personal taboo. Maybe if I get rich, I can make bolder moves, guilt-free, and claim the privilege of indifference, but more is at stake at the bottom. We don't know each other in this life, and it's the million-dollar question, the gravity of the moon. So we can't talk about it. It's too vast. You appear hard to find. Yet I can see you in my face, ever present. I was told it was one of the worst things a woman can specifically endure, and often people will feel sorry for you. Ironically, it's my greatest source of vigor and spite, life slamming me with pure malice, later digested as fuel to outrun a system built against me. Writing feels conflicted, I guess. I've buried the idea of a father, and putting any work into unpacking my ideas on a fatherless bastard feels like unpaid labor for what? To be saved, to be absolved, to be crushed. Watch out for the girls without fathers. We are the dangerous ones. I've learned to be strong, to embody the butch, and I've learned a lot of bad habits too. Isolation, bottomless rage, and above all else, the code of silence. My father is endless, unresolved, and potential. I asked one of my friends, what's worse, knowing your father or not knowing your father? It might read like a good story, but it doesn't hurt any less. And secretly, I know I'm better off. So, this won't end in a tear-jerking reunion. It will end with me knowing what it took to make a life without a man, and what is more dangerous than that. So, if I want to see you, I will look into your eyes.
I love reading that and hearing it.
Sorry, I don't want to run off, but
No, that's what this is all about. Can y'all hear us okay here? On my, trying to figure out how it can pin. Oh, we don't want to see ourselves. Really do? I don't think we do. We'll just watch. Graham, you're literally being projected this entire time. Just a heads up. So your reaction is everything for us in here.
That's perfect. The shining moment.
Awesome. All right. I'm going to read a piece called Next of Kin. Don't mind the shaking of the paper. That's a part of it. So this piece is actually the stack over here on the floor in the exhibition. The stack of paper, you feel free to take a piece off, or a few if you would like. This is Next of Kin. This is a story, my story of what this work really has come from. And it felt like it didn't need to belong anywhere complete because it's not complete and it's never been complete. So the piece itself is a stack of printer paper with excerpts and fragments of this story. So right now is the only time it's going to be in one togetherness. So yeah, let's see how that goes. He was found yesterday in an apartment that was apparently his in Appleton, Wisconsin. Yesterday was November 3rd, 2021. He didn't mean much to me. He has been absent in my life since I was 2 years old, but with a thin history of popping up here and there unexpectedly. Once when I was 10, and again when I was 26. I never know if I'm supposed to say abandoned, estranged, divorced, or now dead. My mom called while Tiana and I were still in bed this morning to tell me. She told me that she got a call from a cop looking for his daughter to inform her, as next of kin, that he was dead. I'll make that call tomorrow. I learned that his other ex-wife and 2 sons had been contacted, but don't want anything to do with this. I knew they existed from a letter he wrote me in 1995, and a small photo of the 4 of them against a blue Sears backdrop. I don't blame them. He left them too. I had to Google the difference between mourning and grieving today. I guess I have already grieved my grief, but this is my mourning. I've learned more about my father since his death than I have ever learned in the 34 years of him living. From autopsy and toxicology reports, from the mouths of police sergeants, coroners, funeral directors, landlords, and old friends that didn't even know I existed, all telling me bits and pieces of who this person was. What do you do with that information? I might know how he died, but I'll never know how he lived. What I do know is that he overdosed on gabapentin. The coroner thinks it was a suicide based off his phone's recent search history. It's strange to rely on other unknown men to decode this one for me. He wasn't found for 11 days. That would make it October 23rd. I was told he was living in Dallas on the streets, in shelters, when COVID hit. An old friend of his from the 80s was the person that went down to Texas to get him and bring him up to Wisconsin to help him get his shit together. Soon after that, he became his power of attorney and assisted with his disability checks and finances. This man told me that he was the one that found him. Poor guy. Apparently, he went to the gas station across the street from his apartment every day to buy a pack of cigarettes and a cup of coffee. At least he was consistent with something. This man noticed that these charges hadn't gone through on his account for over a week, and when he tried to reach him, he couldn't. He died in a chair in a dirty apartment. I'm finding myself wanting to know more, wanting to see what that apartment looked like. Maybe closure could be found there. We went to Wisconsin. The cop repeatedly told me to prepare myself for seeing the apartment, especially the smell, suggesting that we bring an extra change of clothes. About the stained chair. Quote, the body breaks down pretty quickly, he said to me with pity. I brought back some items in a trash bag from his apartment. Medical paper, 12 plastic bags, a a guitar, his dentures, a small Bible, a notebook. But by the time I got there, things had been moved. The chair had been moved. The stain haunts me. That's it. All right. Next up is a piece by Rami George that's in the book, but Rami's unable to make it today, so Graham is going to read for them. Let me turn you back around and turn that overhead horrible sound off.
Great.
Trying to get a smattering of people so it doesn't feel so intimate, but I'll.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Simone and Jen, for reading so far. Those have been amazing. And like Jen introduced, I'll be reading for Rami, which is a great honor. So, and their piece is titled Daddy. Growing up, my father was always Dad. I found it strange when I heard my friends refer to theirs as Daddy. Something off about the double syllables, likely just a product of my own habit and rearing. In this way, Daddy remained an open term, unattached to my biological father, and one that I could come to later in life amidst my burgeoning sexuality, a preference for older men immediately comprising the bulk of my desire. When I call out Daddy in the midst of getting fucked, I don't see my father's face. I'm grateful for that separation. My oldest memory is a sexual one, attached to older men. I remember walking around a converted jail in Guthrie, Oklahoma, where my mother, sister, and I were temporarily living amidst a New Age cult, my father still in Somerville, Massachusetts, and being captivated by an older man sleeping on a cot, desire from a distance, never consummated. I also remember climbing between the sheets of a leaning bed and pressing a stuffed lobster into the crotch of my pants. My oldest memories, by now undoubtedly skewed through time, age, and a repeated conjuring. And it was just a month or two away from my father. Eventually, he came to retrieve my sister and I, and we entered a few years of a family of us three, now in Portland, Oregon. A single father raising two young children, still such a rare unit. My father was and remains one of the kindest and most loving parents. My daddy fetish not arriving through an absent, withholding, mean, or violent man, but perhaps an obsession and love for a very good one. I'm sure Freud will have something to say, but I'm so tired of Freud as the only possible measure of understanding human sexuality. No gods, no masters. With a hippie father, we used to shower together, bonding time, nudity without sexuality, or at least without it named. I also remember the pool showers, lingering far too long, hoping for glances of the naked men, not boys. I cared little for them. I remember the underwear sections of newspapers and department stores, outlines of older cocks contained between layers of cotton, lingering eyes under the guise of respectable shopping. Once, as a youth, I jerked off in the middle of a Parisian department store, stroking my little small cock through the pockets of my baggy pants, my small load dripping down my thigh. I always found it strange how we desexualized children. I certainly was obsessed. Eventually, when I came out to my mother, I expressed how I've always been attracted to older men. She blamed herself, likening this kink to the temporary separation from my father, that brief time searching for men to fill that role. I scoffed then, but if that's the reason, so be it. Lastly, I've had to confront my father's mortality more head on. Still a hippie with a lifelong resistance to the Western medical system, there was a recent stint where he was in and out of the emergency room, and a large prostate causing repeated issues. By grace, he was living with my sister, we children having recently helped move him out of our childhood home in Portland, a closing of a chapter. It's unclear if he would have survived if he was home alone, likely holding out rather than seeking medical attention. He has no fear of dying, though, a deeply spiritual human with a belief that death is merely a return home. I've worked to embrace some of this openness towards death as an equal and necessary part of life, but of course, easier said than done. I'm grateful for our recent extended phone calls, learning to know each other in deeper ways, seeing this person more fully, flaws and all. Early in our sexualities, we often think our fetishes and kinks are entirely particular and unique. The magic of the internet quickly reveals otherwise. It's been interesting to see the daddy fetish become such a part of mainstream life and shared culture. What is it about this moment? Or has it always been there, now with the new openness and reckoning? Undoubtedly, still so much a product of a deeply fucked patriarchal society, the absent father, physically, emotionally, both ever present. The impossible role of daddy in our culture, the inability to fathom another possibility, the nuclear family, and monogamy as a curse, polyamory not necessarily the answer, but a necessity in allowing for multitudes. I started to get a few messages on the gay apps calling me daddy. I joke with my fellow 30-year-olds of how suddenly, seemingly, the tables have turned. I mostly ignore these messages, but my appetite is expanding. It's still rare I sleep with someone younger than myself, but I'm far more open to it. Lately, I found myself sleeping with a handful of men in their 60s, mostly learning of age after the fact. A shock to some, but if you still got it, go for it. Sometimes I call out daddy in the middle of the bedroom, but it's no longer the only barometer of desire. A preference for the older without the need to play certain roles is ever instant. Recently, an older lover remarked how mature I am for my age, a frequent comment growing up. A product of intense childhood trauma, I half joked, us both laughing. Daddy, of course, is a state of mind. I still prefer the younger role, but sexuality is ever shifting, and what a beautiful thing that is. We don't necessarily choose our desires, nor how they form. We can, of course, unpack them. Thank you. And I want to thank Rami for that beautiful piece.
Thanks for reading that. And thanks to Rami.
Yes, of course.
For writing that beautiful piece. All right, we're going to take a few seconds to set up the next reader, which is actually going to be a short appropriated musical performance. So hang tight and we'll be ready in a minute. Situation now. Hi everyone, I'm Tiana. I'm Jen's partner. Oh. She asked me to write something for this. I also have a super cool dad. And I was just like, no, I don't have the capacity to start unearthing stuff and writing stuff. But I can respond differently. Throughout this whole process of like finding his stuff, sifting through everything, I feel like a lot of music came up
So we kind of chose some of these songs together, some of which we chose together, some of which she was like, you gotta play this because I like it. Did he like that song?
No, they're all based on not him.
So yeah, so really me singing some of these songs is meant to be kind of a subversion of the gendered language in the songs. Also, like, they kind of conjured up daddy in, I think, a few different ways. Some of these I'm not stoked to play, but doing it feels kind of radical anyways. This is my bandmate Dylan. Dylan is here to accompany me. We're gonna do our best.
Do you want to scoot towards the stains?
You tell me where to be.
Yeah, scoot towards the stains.
There we go.
So you can grab space event directly.
Oh, also, this is his guitar. This is her dad's guitar. Today is the first day I've ever played it. I wiped it down today. This gross finger stains all over it. This will probably be the only time it's ever played. At least the strings will ever be touched. So, I don't know. We'll see what happens. You're mine. You're my angel, girl of mine. I'd like to thank you for waiting patiently. Daddy's home. Daddy's home. To stay. How I waited for this moment, just to be by your side. Best friend Robin told me you had teardrops in your eyes. Daddy's home. Daddy's home to stay. It wasn't on a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, go by. It wasn't on a Tuesday afternoon. All I could do was cry. I made a promise that you treasure. But I made it back home to you. How I waited for this moment, just to be by your side. Best friend Robin told me you had teardrops in your eyes. Daddy's home. Daddy's home to stay. Alright, so this next one, never in a million years would I ever put this song on. Would I play it out loud? I would probably make fun of it if it was playing at a, right? If we were at a bar, I'd be like, but this is a daddy song, so.
Does anyone know how I can turn that thing on? How do I make this go? Gallery? I don't want to put everyone on blast. I think. Oh my god, it's meta. Oh my god, I hate that. Yeah, that's a no on that one too. Okay. Can I just?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Can we get like the like iTunes?
That's what I would. That would be perfect, or even just like black. How do I do that? Oh well.
If you know this one, feel free to help me. Great.
Just look at that girl with the light coming up in her eyes. She's got to be somebody's babe. She must be somebody's babe. All the guys on the corner stand back and walk on the She's got to be somebody's babe. She must be somebody's babe. She's got to be somebody's babe. She's probably somebody's only light gonna shine tonight. Probably somebody's baby tonight. I heard her talking to a friend when she thought no one else was around. She said she's got to be somebody's babe. She must be somebody's babe. 'Cause all the cars and the lights and the street lights light up the town. She's got to be somebody's babe. She must be somebody's babe. She's got to be somebody's babe. Oh, she's probably somebody's only light gonna shine tonight. She's probably somebody's baby. I try to shut my eyes, but I can't get her out of my sight. Something's happening, something clear, and I can believe it. She's got to be somebody's baby. She must be somebody's baby. She's got to be somebody's baby. She's probably somebody's only light gonna shine tonight. She's probably somebody's baby. You should lose me. Oh yeah. You should lose me. Oh yeah. You know I love you. Do anything for you. Just don't mistreat me. I'll be good to you. You should lose me. Oh yeah. It's a good thing. I've given you one more chance for you to do it right. If you don't straighten up now, you'd have your life. If you should lose me. Oh yeah. It's a good thing. This is my last time, not asking anymore. If you don't believe me, gonna march right out that door. You should lose me. Just try it, Daddy. It's a good thing. Just try it, Daddy. It's a good thing. Just try it.
can think of younger days when living for my life. Everything see. I was never told about the sorrow. How can you mend a broken heart? How can you stop the rain from falling down? How can you stop the sun from shining? I can still feel the breeze rustling through the trees and misty memories of days we could never see tomorrow. No one told us about sorrow. How can you mend a broken heart? How can you stop the rain from falling down? How can you stop the sun from shining? What makes the how can you mend a broken heart? How can you stop the rain from falling down? How can you stop the sun from shining? What makes the
I think Daddy Reverend Al Green would be proud of himself. Hey, internet friends, how is it sounding and feeling for y'all?
Good on my end.
Good. Beautiful. back over here. Oh, good. All right. Yes, we can hear you clapping from North Portland. Keep it up. Keep up the whooping. All right. Up next is Kyle Cohlmia. I'm gonna make sure. Yeah. You feel good? Everyone feel good? Okay. Awesome. Okay.
All right, I will not be singing, which will be good for everyone here. Yeah, I'm Kyle. Thank you so much, Jen, for organizing this, and thanks everybody for being vulnerable and sharing their work. This poem that I'm sharing today is a compilation of essays and other poems that I wrote for graduate school around themes of family, immigration, theories of place, grief, loss, and fathers. It deals a bit with my personal ancestors' immigration story from Lebanon, as well as more recent Lebanese politics and the loss of my father last June. I do reference a couple of Lebanese artists and writers, Tel Adnan, Mohammed Darwish, oral histories that I heard from my family, personal anecdotes, and things like that. So it's a little bit all over the place, but that's how grief is. So, and the title means home in Arabic. The last memories I have of you are in the field behind our house, throwing that ball around and chasing the dog on the green. Swollen summer nights in Oklahoma turn pink and orange, but before the sun burns grass into tiny swords for snake homes. Before the roses die and the lake turns brown to bathwater, before the hospital bed, before the IVs and night nurses, after. We sat and watched the fireworks, the tips of sparkle mixing in with the stars, and the mosquitoes ate us up like molasses, a bloody battle for such a small hill. Our first July without you. In June, I texted, Happy Father's Day, but you couldn't respond. You always told me about Marjayoun, once Syria, now Lebanon, south of Beirut, north of Israel. The images I have are reminiscent of what I know. Long stretches of land uninhibited, land full of dust and tumbleweeds, land of fences, yes, but also of valleys and rolling hills, like Western Oklahoma land, dry from the wind, burnt from the sun. This land full of grape leaves and olive trees, of red earth clay that sifts and shifts with every footprint. There our ancestors built bayet, built home from stone and traded cigarettes for jars of olive oil. Women cooked inside curtain-shaded kitchens, and outside the aroma invited peddlers to venture from door to door. Sometimes I think we don't need to have to travel to felt a place, and sometimes home can be more than one. According to Lebanese folklore, Beirut was destroyed and rebuilt 7 different times. Archaeologists found 7 different sites of what is now known as Beirut, rose from the ashes with 7 lives, 7 different bayets, 7 separate homes. The 5th Beirut was said to be found in an orchard of mulberry trees on the left bank of the river. The area has now been built on. At the site of the 3rd Beirut, archaeologists found remnants of what could be described as a hut circle, a circular or oval depression in the ground, low stone walls for a foundation, a round house. Sometimes I wonder what our lives would be like if we lived in round houses, no hallways or doors to separate us, no corners to jab at our sides. What if isolation didn't matter so much and we thought about our days in loops instead of lines? Maybe the nurse would have let me sit next to you right before. Glass is the ground that Beirut walks on, while explosions in June make for a poisonous winter, and pink is the color that emerges from an orange genocide as we hang August on its chair. B is for Beirut, is for begin, is for blue, a caldera for the volcano whose burnt walls taste bitter in our depleted mouths. I indulge in sleep, synthetic and bright, soft lamps and blackout curtains curtail my knees into sheets of slumber, because to erase one's identity is to destroy one's land, to create a census, to obsess over the archive, to compare oneself to Adam, to make coffee before the bombs drop. And while the smoke still rises and the buildings fall to their knees, a spider web is lying softly on my arm, pulling at my pores like a kite on the beach, like an eel, like the slow speed of the internet out in rural Oregon, whose dock reminds me of home, but where I've melted into still. I pray for Palestine like I pray for the wind to break through this crater. The bond between the sun and my skin ripples away, a sea for a seafarer and sea foam that is pulled back and forth by the androgynous moon. It's hard to write about a place that no longer exists, replaced by ashes, torn away too soon, from neglect, from silence, from a Cancer moon. June to June, 1 year in, but how will we make it to 7? When I hear crows before summer, I wonder where they came from, and I wanted you to know that I planted the grape leaves right before the rain. And I wanted you to know I never called you daddy because you were always home to me.
My lips, otherwise my lips will stick tight. We're gonna take a water break. Does anyone else need a water break for a second? Okay. I'll be right back. Thanks, Kyle. I've never heard you read before or really read anything, and like blew me away. That was really beautiful. I'm gonna read "Diving into the Wreck" by Adrienne Rich. It was funny because I mentioned the first thing I really did started making work kind of randomly on my own when I found out about my dad. I call him Dead Dad when the Dead Dad thing happened. And I asked all these people I love dearly to write something. And in that weird pregnant time where everyone was out writing and contemplating and stressing about it, I was so eager to hear their words that I started looking for other things in my home that was going to fill that void of the conversation I was so excited to have. And one of the things, it was a lot of music there at the opening. I played a huge playlist that Tiana and I have been putting together for months, but the other thing was poetry. So I'm going to read this piece, which doesn't necessarily fit in like the way that maybe this poem fits, but maybe after hearing all the daddies in the room, this will kind of hit a little different. Diving into the wreck. First, having read the Book of Myths and loaded the camera and checked the edge of the knife blade, I put on the body armor of black rubber, the absurd flippers, the grave and awkward mask. I am having to do this, not like Cousteau with his assiduous team aboard the sun-flooded schooner, but here, alone. There is a ladder. The ladder is always there, hanging innocently, close to the side of the schooner. We know what it's for. We know what it is for, we who have used it. Otherwise, it's a piece of maritime floss, some sundry equipment. I go down, rung after rung, and still the oxygen immerses me, the blue light, the clear atoms of our human air. I go down. My flippers cripple me. I crawl like an insect down the ladder, and there is no one to tell me when the ocean will begin. First, the air is blue, and then it is bluer, and then green, and then black. I am blacking out, and yet my mask is powerful. It pumps my blood with power. The sea is another story. This is not a question of power. I have to learn alone, to turn my body without force in a deep element. And now it is easy to forget what I came for, among so many who have always lived here, swaying their crenellated fans between the reefs. And besides, you breathe differently down here. I came to explore the wreck. The words are purposes. The words are maps. I came to see the damage that was done and the treasures that prevail. I stroke my beam of my lamp along the flank of something more permanent than fish or weed. The thing I came for, the wreck, and not the story of the wreck. The thing itself and not the myth. The drowned face always staring towards the sun. The evidence of damage worn by salt and sway into this threadbare beauty. The ribs of the disaster, curving their assertion among the tentative haunters. This is the place, and I am here. The mermaid whose dark hair streams black. The mermaid and his armored body. We circle silently about the wreck. We dive into the hold. I am she, I am he, whose drowned face sleeps with open eyes, whose breasts still appear the stress, whose silver, copper, vermeil cargo lies obscurely inside barrels, half wedged and left to rot. We are the half destroyed instruments that once held to a course, the water-eaten log, the fouled compass. We are, I am, you are, by cowardice or courage, the one who find our way back to the scene, carrying a knife, a camera, a book of myths in which our names do not appear. All right, I forget. Well, now I got Jodi. Awesome, Jodi Darby. Come on up. Speak loud.
Wow, this is neat. Hi, everybody. I want to thank Jenn Sova so much for being able to transform what I would imagine to be a difficult experience into an opportunity for visibility and healing and connection. Thank you so much. And thank you for all of this and all of you. This is a piece, it's interesting because like I have a pretty good relationship with my father these days. You wouldn't know it from this piece, but you know, spoiler alert there. This is a piece called Negative Space. I'm gonna grab my water also because my mouth gets real dry. Thank you. I remember the song that was on the radio and that it felt golden, the way a lot of songs on the radio in the 70s felt. It also felt the way car interiors feel when they're warm from the sun. A dizzying wash of sunlight, naugahyde, and gas fumes illuminating the whole world as it rolled past the window. Are you reeling in the years? Stowing away the time. Are you gathering up the tears? Have you had enough of mine? She had taken the whole bottle of Lorazepam and washed it down with Joaquin's apricot-flavored brandy, but I didn't know that. What I did know was that something had changed. My 5-year-old psyche and cosmology had shifted. My experience became sketches of textures, smells, and patterns. The house where we lived was small, but it didn't feel small to me. Every corner of every room was its own world. I spent a lot of time inside the house staring at things, counting and recounting the hobnail dots on my parents' bedspread and searching the sparkly weave of their console stereo speaker for meaning. Like a tiny Aldous Huxley on mescaline. I spent time under the bed or in the cupboard where my father kept the onions, rubbing the red plastic mesh bag against my lips. I was the explorer Jacques Cousteau, under the mighty Calypso, diving into places that were so deep you could lose track of everything. Thank you to Audrey and Rich for providing that kind of opening. Very well played. My papa told me she was tired and needed to go away to rest for a while, so I waited. His routine did not change when she left. He got up at the same time each morning and put on his blue Dudley Martin Chevrolet work shirt, matching pants, and steel-toed shoes from the Sears Roebuck catalog. He would drink exactly 2 cups of Nescafe, and sometimes he would hum, and sometimes he would tap his finger along the side of the kitchen table, but he rarely spoke. When he felt like he'd spent enough time drinking and humming and tapping, he would get up and drive himself to the garage where he worked. When she was home, he would come home a little after 5, and dinner would already be on the table waiting for him. I remember he would bring home with him the smell of the shop, engine fumes, gas, and rubber. It was a smell that made my mother sick when she was pregnant with me, apparently, but it didn't seem to bother her anymore. We would sit in the same chair each night and eat dinner as a family in silence. My mother would excuse herself from the table 5 minutes into each meal every time. She would begin to wash up, and my father would say, "Sit down, Betty," but she would just keep cleaning. After she went away, our meals were no longer punctuated by this performance. We would often sit for too long at the table, not knowing what to do, as if missing this dramaturgy had disrupted our rhythm. Then we would go into the living room and watch television. The second time it happened, I was 11. The older I got, the angrier it made me that my father was still telling me those same stories. One can only attempt to modify a child's reality for so long. Children begin to know their own sense of intuition and start to recognize the magic, not magic, of consciousness without deliberation, which is a gift. And most children don't appreciate having their gifts minimized or challenged. How in the world does a person get up in the morning, plug in their curling iron, take anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour to fix their hair, then try to kill themselves before lunch? I asked him. My father did not have an answer to my question. It happened a couple more times as far as I know. While trying to make sense of my mother's frequent suicide attempts and my father's inability to talk about them, I made him disappear. I figured all of this would be easier with fewer variables. When I was very small, his disappearance began to take place unconsciously. In my dream, he and I were together, sharing a slice under the fluorescent lights of the mall pizzeria. It's called the Orange Bowl. 1 minute he was there, using his napkin to sop up a puddle of oil. The next minute he was gone. By the time I went to look for him, the mall had closed, the lights were off, and the stores had all pulled down their metal security gates pulled down, as if they were undergoing orthodonture. In my dream, I did not find him. The mall dream matured into one where I was walking home from school on the block where I'd grown up. The houses were the same, but slightly different. Unfamiliar cars in the driveway, new varieties of plants in the yard. As I approached my own house, I noticed there was a bright yellow plastic pinwheel stuck in the lawn, spinning and spinning and spinning. My parents would never tolerate a plastic spinning wheel in their yard, I remember thinking, through layers of dream. And as I approached the front door, I realized that my family was gone and someone else had moved into our house. Later, I reimagined my father as a cutout, a small father-shaped hole that barely existed. I imagined him as negative space, an image cut from the page of a National Geographic magazine, as if I'd used my safety scissors to remove a grizzly bear or a buffalo or a toucan from its habitat before relocating it with a glue stick onto a monochromatic backdrop of a sheet of construction paper. except I didn't glue him anywhere. He wasn't a ghost yet because he wasn't made of that kind of historic matter. I had done my best to reduce him dimensionally. He was dead air, the static on the television set, and the part of the record that skipped. He was late night television when the shows go off and the flag comes out and they make you sing the national anthem. This is a test of the emergency broadcast system. This is only a test. We have developed a system to keep you informed in the event of emergency. Important information will follow this tone.
Up next is Francis. And Francis and I have been chatting about length of, and we've got all the time in the world. So yeah, read that whole puppy. And if you want to stand or sit or both, all, feel free.
So when Jen asked me if I wanted to write something for this reading, I realized almost right away that I needed to write fiction, which I've never done before. How I wrote this short story is similar to how I make my visual art. Layering fantasy and folklore between my personal experience is a comfortable and familiar way for me to examine my relationships to complex and often painful subjects. This story was influenced by watching and listening to Jen as she built this work, and a response to her prompts to consider the intertwined subjects of fathers, grief, masculinity, and queerness. And I have these two little things at the top for myself, but I think with listening to everybody else read, there's a thread running through. So this was one of the inspirations for this story, along with the Tower tarot card became significant as I wrote this. He understood that modeling the incoherent and vertiginous matter of dreams. Let me start again. He understood that modeling the incoherent and vertiginous matter of which dreams are composed was the most difficult task that a man could undertake, even though he should penetrate all the enigmas of superior and inferior order, much more difficult than weaving a rope out of sand or coining the faceless wind. And that's from Jorge Luis Borges' The Circular Ruins. The carriage road. The bog was in a narrow valley where the land sloped away from the water. Low-lying shrubs and mosses gave way to a dark vertical wall of cedar forest. A crescent wisp of an ancient carriage road ran along one side of the bog. Time-softened wheel ruts emerged from the woods on one side of the wetland and followed the curvature of a hillside before climbing up a narrow shale ridge and disappearing back into the cedars. In daylight, this place was perpetually dim, an endless gray dawn where nothing cast a shadow. At night, the bog was a void cut with small flames licking up through the peat from somewhere deep underground. The positions of the planets and stars were hidden, and a thin vapor, smoke, or fog touched every surface of the water. Between the road and the bog was a stone wall. The rocks in the wall were pale in spots from blooms of lichen, and many had deep, thin cavities on their surface. When broken open, these pitted stones revealed the ghost shapes of creatures that had crawled and writhed and taken root and died here when this land was underneath a vast sea or at the edge of a tidal shoreline. In the middle of the bog stood a small clapboard house on high timber pilings. While the house had several windows, it seemed to be without a door. The wooden siding of the house had once been whitewashed, but it was now the color of ash. A slick, rotting shell ridden with silverfish and the pale lumps of mushrooms. Inside the house, the animal sat on top of a rusty refrigerator. Using its hooked claws, it picked at the edge of a hole in the wall. It pried a chunk of plaster loose that fell to the floor and shattered. The boy flinched and spun around to face the kitchen. A cloud of plaster dust was settling over the impact explosion, and the animal had already moved out of view. The boy could hear the animal creeping up in the space between the top of the cabinets and the ceiling. He felt vibrations through his gut as the four-legged beast jumped down from the top of the cabinet to the damp floorboards. From the shadows, its talons clicked against the wood as it walked across the house. The boy heard a soft thump, followed by a creak as an old dresser strained under the weight of the animal. He listened to it turn in a few circles and settle. When he caught a glimpse of it at all, the animal was only ever a smudge in the boy's peripheral vision. Like an insect, it moved fast and slow, sticky, unpredictable. It walked the perimeter of the inside of the house incessantly, pressing the full weight of its body against the walls. The oils from its fur left arteries of sooty stains on the plaster and wallpaper. The animal slunk between dim places, on top of high shelves and cornices, under the small iron frame bed, in the narrow space behind the dresser. The animal often whispered to itself, and it would sometimes say things to the boy. When the animal spoke, the boy felt a strap of hot electric panic tighten across his chest. The boy turned back to the window and looked out across the bog and faced another colorless dusk. The dark came down like a lid as palm-sized flames bubbled up from the mud and singed the reeds and started small fires in the dead grass. The boy reached out to lift open the window, imagining that a current of air could relieve the smell of rot that permeated his house. But his fingertips passed through the corroded handles on the window sash with just the slightest resistance, like passing a hand through a thick cobweb. Something of this place drained his memories, for a similar thing had happened before. The boy had tried to pick up a silver hand mirror that lay on top of the bureau, and his palm passed through its handle and through the top of the dresser, like he was made of mist. From an ink-dark perch in a far corner of the house, the animal had been watching. It clicked its tongue at the boy and choked a cruel, phlegmy laugh. The boy felt his breath catch in his throat and the corners of his eyes burned with tears. "You're lucky to be in here," the animal hissed, "with me." During the long night hours, the boy curled up on the floor in a corner and closed his eyes. His dreams were incoherent and hallucinatory. Sometimes he would startle awake from these visions, and in the total darkness, he would feel the warmth of the animal beside him. The boy's hand did not pass through the animal as though it were cobwebs, but instead felt the rising and falling of its ribs under a coat of fine matted hair. Sometimes the boy would reach out and feel the animal, and it would rip into his hands and face with needle-sharp canines. He could feel the blood pooling and his flesh hanging in ribbons in the void of the night. But when the leaden dawn cast its first light, the boy found himself unmarked and clean. With a familiar discomfort, the boy realized that the layout of the house had rearranged again during the night. The labyrinth of the animal's greasy stain was also reordered, but still continuous through the house. The animal was quiet. Sleeping or watching, the boy thought. The boy stood, turning his palms over to inspect his hands and forearms, confused that the injuries the animal inflicted on him last night were gone. Had he dreamt it? The smell of smoke shifted the boy's attention. Walking to a window, he stood on his tiptoes and looked down. Large clumps of dead grass at the base of the pilings that held up the house were smoldering. Tongues of flame, languid, glowing garnet, lapped at the corners of the lumber. Looking past the smoke, the boy observed an expanse of still black water that began several feet from the base of the pilings.
A herd of 6 deer emerged from the woods at the far end of the bog, and the boy watched them pick their way across the soft ground towards the water. They were close enough to the boy that he could see they were freckled with engorged ticks. The lead doe froze and rotated the soft shells of her ears. She stomped her front hooves in the mud and snorted as the rest of the herd stood still, close behind. As he watched them approach the edge of the water, the boy felt a cold pressure building in his ears that ran down his neck, under his arms, and pooled in his belly. The first doe waded in as the other 5 watched from land. Her hooves and ankles disappeared, and then her forelegs, until she was submerged up to her belly, and she glided through the water and did not stop until she reached the other side of the pool. She shook herself and bounded over the stone wall and stood on the carriage road to face the others who had already begun to follow. The boy stopped breathing. He saw something else moving in the water, approaching the last 2 deer who were crossing. The way the water rippled suggested an enormous shape, a creature far too large to be hidden by the shallow waters of the bog pool. A rounded, spiny fin emerged, slick as hot black tar and reflective even in the dullness of this place. Far behind the dorsal fin, a massive, snake-like tail pulsed in the water and propelled the creature forward. One of the deer was pulled down and disappeared beneath the surface of the water without a sound. The remaining deer bleated, her eyes rolling in terror as she emerged from the pool and struggled in the mud. She scrambled to stand and met the remaining herd, who plowed gracelessly into the dense underbrush of the forest and were gone. The boys stared in horror at the place in the pool where the creature had pulled the deer under, and the water was still as glass. The animal had also been watching. It let out a sharp scream. Terrified, the boy stumbled away from the window and fell backwards onto his hands. "You are so beautiful," the animal whispered into the boy's ear as he lay on his back, frozen in panic. It lunged and sank its fangs into the boy's arm, and just as quickly skittered out of view and into the shadows. The boy scrambled to sit up and scoot backwards towards the wall. He looked down and saw he was bleeding. Cradling his injured arm, he curled his knees up to his chest and listened to the animal walking its worn paths, dragging its body along the walls through the house. The boy noticed the smell of smoke was stronger now, and veins of amber flickered in gaps between the floorboards. Underneath the house, the fire was growing. He could hear the faint, wet pops of gas bubbling up from beneath the mud. The bog fires were reigniting, and it was night again. The boy closed his eyes and dreamt. He was in a bathroom with pale pink tile, and he was wetting his temples with water from the sink, trying to mimic the appearance of sweat. In the dream, the boy looked in the mirror and was overcome with a longing to be put down like a sick animal. The sound of something splashing in the dark outside of the house woke the boy. He tried to hold on to the memory of his reflection from the dream, but it had already gone. Through the floorboards, on the ground far below, the boy heard the sound of teeth stripping meat and tissue from bones, chewing. Off in the dark of the house, the animal twitched and whimpered in its sleep. The boy awoke to find the layout of the house changed once again. Overnight, the house had filled with smoke, and the fire beneath the floors crackled. His arm still throbbed and felt hot, but the small puncture wounds had scabbed over. Disoriented, the boy shuffled towards the nearest window. He stopped short as the floor groaned and a series of pops sounded from below him. The animal wailed from a room at the end of a dark corridor. The boy stood still until all these noises ceased and continued searching for a window overlooking the pool. At the edge of the water, in the mud, lay segments of a deer skeleton, sucked clean of meat and hair. The bright outlines of the bones vibrated in the boy's vision. He stood on his toes and craned his neck to see the fire at the base of the pilings.
It continued to grow throughout the night, eating away at the wood and turning the lumber to brittle charcoal. The structure cracked. The boy felt a rush of vertigo as the house lurched forwards towards the pool. With the house askew, objects slid off their surfaces and smashed. The animal was thrown from its perch in another room, and the boy heard it hit the wall and yelp. He walked up the slanting floor to an unfamiliar corridor and leaned against the wall to support himself. The wall gave way slightly under the boy's shoulder like a spider web, but the boy did not pass through. In the room at the end of the hallway, the boy could hear the animal wheezing beneath the iron frame bed, which had begun to slide across the floor, opening wounds in the wood. With an explosive crack, the house pitched forward again. Large sections of plaster fell away from the walls, exposing ribs of lath. The boy had a sensation that his body had begun to shimmer. As thick smoke filled the room, a metallic flash from the silver hand mirror caught his eye. He reached for it again, and this time felt its cold handle against his palm. He lifted it and turned the reflective surface towards himself. Staring back was a pale boy with long dark hair and gray circles under large brown eyes. The boy stared, and again he felt the shimmer of his body. Behind him, in the reflection, the animal was standing still and silent, meeting the boy's gaze. It had pointed features, both canine and feline, with the red coat of a fox and bulbous yellow eyes on the sides of its narrow skull. Long and rippling, its torso was segmented like that of an insect. The boy shimmered. When he lowered the mirror from in front of his face, he saw the same boy, only translucent, standing before him in a tattered floral nightgown. An animal stood at this boy's heels, whining. The boy turned and saw an identical animal standing several paces behind himself. The fire erupted through the floorboards, and the entire structure of the pilings was engulfed. The house was leaning severely. The boy ran to the windows, and his fingers hooked beneath the handles on the window sash, lifting the pane. He gasped in the cold, damp air, tasting blood in the back of his throat. He leaned forward out the window and tumbled into the water. Underwater, the roar of the fire was muffled. He thought of the dorsal fin and the deer skeleton. He stood up in water to his waist, and by the light of the burning house, he crossed the pool. Once he was out of the water, he turned and saw the house consumed by fire. With the sound of a gunshot, the piling snapped as the house fell into the pool. The flaming house hissed as it hit the water, smoke billowing upwards. The house continued to sink until it disappeared completely. The stumps of the wooden pilings smoldered and extinguished as the bog grew impenetrably dark again. The boy turned and stretched his arms forward, walking until he felt the cold stones of the wall. Trying to orient himself, he pushed his torso up against its surface, reached his arms over to the other side, and clambered over. He fell to the ground and lost consciousness. The boy awoke on a wet cushion of moss with his back against the stone wall. He pulled himself up and stood to face the bog. All that was left where the house had been was a large circle of charred grass. The boy turned and walked to the middle of the carriage road between the overgrown wheel ruts. With arms crossed over his chest, he considered both directions of the road for a moment and then started towards the shale ridge. A twig snapped and the boy spun around. He immediately spotted the animal, wet and wilted and covered in soot, watching him from beneath a patch of sedge. The boy ran to the stone wall and snatched up a rock that fit the palm of his hand and hurled it at the animal. The animal flattened itself close to the ground, backed up into the grass, and blinked its yellow eyes at the boy. He picked up 2 more stones and flung them at it, seething as each failed to make contact. The boy took dead aim, launching 1 more stone at the animal, and watched the rock pass through its body and lodge in the mud behind it. In a rage, he threw his head back and lunged forward at the animal on all fours, hissing and snarling and spitting with his teeth bared. The animal turned and in silence disappeared into the tall grass. The boy picked out 2 more stones from the wall that had deep, thin cavities in their surfaces. He held one in each hand as he resumed walking towards the shale ridge, looking back over his shoulder every few moments until he rounded the bend in the road where it entered the forest and he was gone. In the bog, the fires were sputtering to life again. Tiny bubbles rose to the surface of the pool where the house had sunk, pockets of air escaping from the plaster as it dissolved from between the lap and the walls. The sky was losing light again. Emerging from the brush, the animal trotted in the direction the boy had gone. It continued along the road, hesitating for just a moment before entering the forest. The animal crept up the side of the shale ridge and disappeared around the bend in the carriage road. The end.
Thanks, Francis. That was also the first time I'd heard or read that, so that was amazing. Well, that concludes our Tinder outline. Thanks for coming, everyone in Zoom land. Appreciate it. And Graham, you're going to get the reporting on this, so just hop that over to me when you get a chance.
Of course.
Thanks. But I wanted to thank everyone for coming. And if you're in person, stick around and take a look at the book, buy one. If you're online and want to, you can send us a DM or whatever, however that works. But anyway, thank you so much.